Burkina Faso is in transition. Former President Blaise Compaore, now in exile in Cote d'Ivoire, was forced out of office by a popular uprising. A former French colony, Burkina Faso is a landlocked West African country with a population of slightly over 17 million people. Among the earliest African countries to break the yoke of colonialism, Burkina Faso got its independence from France in 1960. Formerly the Republic of Upper Volta. The country was renamed Burkina Faso on August 4, 1984 by then-President Thomas Sankara. Blaise Compaoré, who was forced out of office by a popular revolt on October 31, 2014, took the reins of power in 1987 through a military coup. In 1990, 3 years after ascending to power, Blaise Compaoré introduced democratic and constitutional reforms. And 10 years later, in 2000, the country's constitution was amended to allow the president to serve 2 terms. Now, in 2005, Blaise Compaoré was elected to a 3rd straight term. In 2010, a divided and ineffective opposition saw him win a 4th term in office. Now, earlier this year, in January, protests broke out throughout the country amid plans by Blaise Compaoré to prolong his rule. By October, the protest had morphed into a mass uprising that finally saw Compaoré resign from office. And sensing a power vacuum, the military stepped in. Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Zida was picked as interim leader. Now, 3 West African leaders jetted into Ouagadougou to negotiate a speedy return of power to civilians. And this is after the military in Burkina Faso stepped in to fill a power vacuum created by the sudden departure of President Blaise Compaoré. Nigeria's President Goodluck Jonathan, Ghana's John Dramani Mahama and Senegal's Macky Sall were in the country on an African Union mission. The African Union is categorical that unconstitutional changes of government in any member state is a serious threat to peace and security. The African Union Commission Deputy Chair Erastus Mwenche spoke to CCTV's Girum Chala in Addis Ababa.
Once in a while in Africa we see unconstitutional change of governments or presidents trying to change constitution so that they can stay in power. What is the stand of the African Union on these particular issues?
The AU view on unconstitutional change of government is zero tolerance. Any government that tries, or any regime that tries to change the constitution unconstitutionally, of course, is immediately suspended and isolated. And of course, we remain with the support of the people to assist such a regime to go back to constitutionality.
On the issue of changing constitutions to elongate life in power, has been a challenge, and case in point is what happened in Burkina Faso just recently. Now, in your view, what are really the dangers associated with such an act?
Well, first of all, I think any legitimate government must respect the will of the people. It is the people that give themselves the constitution. It is the people that, give legitimacy to any leadership. And any maneuvers to try and shortchange the people will always be resisted. And such regime will be illegitimate. And I think the stance here is very clear. Of course, if you look at Africa's history, many countries inherited constitutions that they got from former colonial, and in the process we went through a period where we had one-party regimes, and then of course we saw, particularly in the 90s, many constitutions being changed to provide for the multipartism. And I think we are in that period where some of the constitutions that were adopted in the 80s and 90s could be adjusted, but adjusting them doesn't mean, we have regimes that want to extend themselves beyond really, reasonable, what you could call people's expectations, people's beliefs. And I think this is where the problem comes in. And the lessons we learn from here is that don't try to really take the people for granted, because you can stretch their patience for some time, but a period will come that people will resist, like what we have just seen in Burkina Faso.
Why is it so important for African countries to follow the principles that you've mentioned in order to have a stable and democratic nation in the continent?
First of all, the rule of law, democracy means really people, participating. And any self-respecting regime will ensure that you carry the people along with you. And respecting people's will, people giving the mandate is extremely important. But of course, there are a few instances where you may find a regime that is out of tune with the people, but only self-serving their own interest. And that's when you see people resisting.
The African Union Peace and Security Council asked the military in Burkina Faso to hand over power to the civilian administration in about 2 weeks' time. If that's not going to be the case, what will be next?
Of course, we have people on the ground who are in touch with the military and are trying to work with them to see that as soon as possible, of course not beyond 2 weeks, they return power to the civilians. And if they don't return the power to the civilians, then of course sanctions will kick in.
As I was saying earlier, countries get into problems like we have witnessed in Burkina Faso recently. But on the other hand, will there be any preventive method, perhaps from the African Union side, to avoid such a chaos?
You know that under the African Union we have the Charter on democracy, on elections, and also we have the African peer review mechanism. And all these really countries that want to embrace good practices, all these elements are available. And I don't think it is really for the African Union to go out there and lecture countries to tell them what they should do, because the legitimacy comes from the people. The answer really lies in governments or in regimes trying to make sure that you don't deviate from what the people's will is. And all these practices are available, and you can see them around the world.
Now, a 4-day uprising waged by Burkinabés brought to an abrupt end President Blaise Compaoré's 27-year grip on power. Attempts to change the country's constitution to enable Compaoré extend his stay in office, it would appear, did not go down well with the citizenry, who took to the streets in 4 days of mayhem that witnessed massive destruction of property, including the burning down of the country's parliament buildings.
Burkina Faso's military's decision to take the reins in the aftermath of Compaoré's exit has sparked angry protests at home. The African Union on Monday threatened sanctions. The presidents of Ghana, Senegal and Nigeria have also encouraged Colonel Isaac Zida to step down and adapt civilian rule. However, in spite of having initially indicated keenness to comply with the AU ultimatum, the country's new leader now appears to have changed tune.
The African Union can say 3 days, but that deadline only applies to the African Union. What is important for Burkina Faso is to find a consensus that means that we can get to the end of the year without any problems and to hold elections where everyone will accept the results. We are heading towards a peaceful constitutional situation for the serenity of all Burkinabés.
Zida's remarks come a day after the army agreed on a year-long transition, with elections to be held in November 2015. Wednesday's talks, however, failed to designate a leader, but diplomats voiced optimism that the transfer of power to civilians would be achieved swiftly. Analysts, however, warned that a military attempt to hold on to power could see a return to street protests similar to those witnessed last week.
The military needs to hand over power to enable us to have a peaceful transition in a very short time. I think the 2 weeks proposed by the African Union is too long.
les 2 semaines que l'Union africaine.
The youth want to see what the transitional government will do. The ultimatum for this will be when the transition starts. If the transitional government forgets the aspiration of the young people who went out on the streets, and if the transitional government doesn't deliver, all the youth will be back on the streets.
According to the military leaders, consultations between political and civil society stakeholders will continue in a bid to establish a widely accepted transitional government. Mahia Mutwa, CCTV.
Now, Burkina Faso's interim leader, Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Zida, says the army is not interested in power and has pledged to oversee a quick installation of what he describes as a broad consensus unity government. The African Union has threatened sanctions if this does not happen. When we return from the break, we'll take a look at why the African Union Democracy Charter spells out strong views on unconstitutional change of government. Welcome back to the program. Now, Burkina Faso's political stakeholders have agreed a caretaker government will take charge of the country for the next 1 year. Already, the clock is ticking on the African Union's 2-week ultimatum to the army to hand back power to civilian rule. The army, on its part, has also made it clear its position not to cling to power. So is there anything to worry about? And if so, what would that be? Well, joining us from Ouagadougou to put some perspective on this unfolding event in Burkina Faso is Leandre Bassolé, a former ambassador and minister. He's also a member of the NPP party. And joining me also here in studio is Dr. Yolan Buka, a conflict prevention and risk analyst researcher at the Institute of Security Studies. And in studio here with me is Professor Peter Kagwanja, the chief executive of the Africa Policy Institute. Welcome to the program. Well, I'm going to start off with you in Ouagadougou, Mr. Leandre Bassolé. Now, a deal has been struck on a caretaker government that will be that will handle the transition for the next 1 year. Is this enough, though, to regain constitutional order?
Well, thank you very much. And before I respond to your question, let me first of all have a few words of compassion towards those comrades who lost their life on the 30th and those who have been wounded. I think that we did not deserve such a situation to happen because not just to take you back to our history,
right,
but since some years now, no stone have been left unturned to clearly put it forward, telling President Compaore that insisting in again changing the goalposts will not be good for the country. The cry of the population has not been heard. It falls into the years of death. So I think that on the 30th, what you have seen is a kind of what we can call a tsunami. Tsunami comes usually after a tornado.
All right.
And this tornado was there, making signals. So I think this upright of the people shows clearly that Burkina Faso, we are stand up and we want everybody in the country to know that today things are changed.
If I may just jump in there, now there's going to be a caretaker government that will oversee the transition. Is this enough, though, to appease the Burkinabes?
Yeah, I think the way things are moving, we have a reason to be satisfied because, as you know, the all political parties, the civil society, all of them are united and are speaking with the same voice. This transition should be under the direction of civilians. And I think that while praising what our army has done to accompany this uprising of the people, they have shown clearly that we are moving to respond to this call of the population, that is that the transition will be guided by civilians. That way, I don't think there is any reason for us to be worried.
All right. Dr. Buka, you're listening. Is there still any cause for the region, for the rest of Africa, though, to worry about the event in Burkina Faso?
I think leaders in place currently should pay close attention to what's going on in Burkina Faso. I think we all know that there are a few elections coming up next year and in the years to come throughout the region. And we have cases where presidents such as Nkurunziza in Burundi or the president of Rwanda or the president of the DRC are considering running for additional terms and changing the constitutions in order to run for additional terms. So I think the story should be looking at the reaction of the international community, the reaction of the African Union towards what happened in Burkina Faso. I think the conditions are quite different in all these varying countries, but I think it's the time for the African Union to be very clear on what they mean by unconstitutional transitions or changes of government.
All right, but of course, Dr. Buka, you've watched the reaction of the African Union. We've all watched the reaction of ECOWAS, which has sent the ECOWAS chair, though, to Burkina Faso, as well as two other presidents from the region. Africa has already taken it in its stride, though, to sort out that problem that is Burkina Faso.
I think what they've done is make it clear, as they've done in years past in Niger, for instance, that they will not tolerate military coups. And I think the African Union has the opportunity in this case not only to make a statement about military coups, but making a clear statement about what they believe should be the level to which we respect constitutional integrity in Africa.
All right, let's just return to Burkina Faso for the moment there. Mr. Basole, though, who is in charge at the moment? Because it still seems that it is still unclear whether this is a military coup or whether, you know, this is a people's uprising. Who is in charge at the moment?
No, I think it's clear. It's clear in the way that this situation has been created by an uprising of the people. So you cannot any way put it as a coup d'etat. This is clear. I think there is no confusion about it. Now, the situation is such as we have, for the time being, a military who is leading things up to we are speaking. But at the same moment, some of you have rightly said that the military said that they are not here to hang up to power. This also is a position. And since then, since they came to direct this military move, they have been in permanent consultation with all the entire nation, talking to all those who can bring some contribution. And through their contacts, through the discussion they are having, repeatedly they have seen the volunteer, the will to hand over, to make it in such a way that the transition will be under the direction of civilians. So I think that is clear. We cannot talk about a coup d'etat.
All right. Your thoughts, though, Professor Kagwanja here. You're watching these developments, and Dr. Booker there, of course, is raising concern at the way the African Union, has spoken out about the situation in Burkina Faso. What are your thoughts on that?
Let me make the first observation that what you're experiencing in Burkina Faso is an African-wide problem, and it is a problem of transitions. All the conflict we have witnessed in the recent decades is not about the conflicts of the old between warring parties. It is they are about the leaders, the incumbents, refusing to exit power and extending their terms. And when they do so, then the civilians go to the streets and they are backed by the military. We have seen that recently in Egypt. We have seen that in many other parts of Africa. Now, the reaction of the African Union has been the classic one, designed in 2004, saying that they are not going to tolerate military coups. But they don't have a template, and I agree with the doctor, that they don't have a good template of how do you move from this rejection of military coups to a more organic response to situations that look like civilian-backed military coups. In Cote d'Ivoire, the colleague is saying that the military is in position up to this time, although this is a civilian-led uprising.
Right.
But in terms of the holding of power, it is in the reins of the military, and it is the military who will decide who becomes. If you begin to see what has happened in Egypt, at the end of the day, the military decided that the general is going to be the leader.
All right.
Are we likely to see that in Burkina Faso?
We'll put that to Mr. Basola there. What are the expectations of the people? Because an example is being given as to what the Egyptians wanted in Egypt, and that is what they got. What is it that the people of Burkina Faso want?
No, really, I don't think we can just compare the situation in Egypt to what has happened in Burkina. We are very clear, and even if you have had the opportunity of following the discussions going on, you will come to the conclusion that what came out of these discussions is that it's clear that the constitution, for example, which has been suspended, will be restored. That's a great, I think, achievement. That proves that we are on the right way to have a transition under the control of a civilian group. So far, a lot have been achieved. If you can see the decisions or the point they made after the meetings with the three presidents,
right,
after the consultations, you can see that the only question remaining is the designation of who will lead the transition. And that, I think, it's not of lack of will. It's just this issue, this question is very sensitive and maybe need a little bit more time than the others who has been agreed upon.
All right. Dr. Bukato, we were drawing the comparison here between other uprisings that have happened in Africa, though, in Libya, in Egypt, and in Mali as well, though. But most times, though, a change in leadership doesn't necessarily mean a change in the people's lives. What do we expect, though, from Burkina?
I think, I'm not quite sure. I think it's premature to say what to expect in Burkina. I think it will depend on this one important factor, which is who's going to be the leader of the transition. I think it depends on the role the military will be willing to play in order to facilitate the transition. And I think it will also depend on the cohesiveness of the opposition. We've seen those 75 members of the CDP who walked out on their parties early in January in order to join the opposition. Yet those two groups, the one that is been led by the MPP and the group that is led by Mr. Diabré, do not have philosophical similarities. They come from different groups. They have different philosophies. So I think in terms of understanding what is ahead for Burkina Faso, the next few days will be very telling. Who will lead the transition? And yet another transition in an African country where the situation could have been avoided if the message had been sent clearly by regional actors and the African Union that not only will it not accept military coups in Africa, but we will stop the manipulation of constitution in order to allow a smooth transition.
All right. Mr. Basole, though the continent is watching the unfolding events there, what will be expected, though, from Burkina Faso in coming weeks, in coming months, in the next 1 year until the election in 2015?
Yeah, thank you. You know, let me put it clearly. I think that we are open to relations with all the world, friendship with all the world. But I would have put the question, you know, another way. What the people of Burkina Faso is expecting to come out from this process. We are not, I'm not saying we are not concerned about what the exterior could be, you know, wanting us to have. But the most important for us is what our people want, period. And from there, I think that this country is full of wisdom, full of people. It's not that we are only the upright people, as our name suggests, but we are also a people really very wise and with a strong determination. Again, we don't see our militaries, you know, putting themselves aside such a process, because they are part of this population, and they are also, they have their word to say, their contribution to bring in, you know, this reborn and this reconstruction of our democracy, to make sure that justice is for all, to make sure that this cry, you know, for more justice, for more good governance have been heard, and heard first by our people, because they are the ones who are, again, going to rule this country tomorrow.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment, though. Professor Peter Kagwanja, the Chief Executive of the Africa Policy Institute, thank you. And in Ouagadougou, in Burkina Faso, Mr. Leandre Basole, a former ambassador and a minister. He's also a member of the NPP party there in Burkina Faso. Also joining us here in Nairobi, Dr. Yolande Buka, a conflict prevention and risk analysis researcher at the Institute of Security Studies. To you all, thank you very much for your insights on the program. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Goodbye.